This question comes from Chris Freed in Philadelphia. He says, we know that Greg Abel and Ajit Jain are the next generation of Berkshire leaders. Who are currently behind Greg and Ajit in their respective roles?
Well, that will be the question that they give their, well, Greg will have some things, extraordinary circumstances, but he's going to succeed me. And then he will be sitting in a position where he needs his equivalent or something close to his equivalent, because he's better at many things than I've been. He will need that substitute. And when the question comes where we know Ajit's opinion on that, but Greg will probably be the one that will make the final decision. I mean, it's his responsibility. And Ajit will give him his best advice, and I think the odds are very, very, very high that Greg would follow it. So, but those are not easy questions. It isn't like everybody talks about the executive bench and all of that sort of thing, which is baloney. I mean, you don't have that many people that can run the largest GAAP net worth company and all kinds of diverse businesses. But you don't need 5 people either. And you need a lot of good operating managers, and you need somebody at the top that allocates capital and make sure that you've got the right operating manager. And we've designed something where we separate the insurance and the rest of the business, and I think it's a very good design. But they would not be smart. We wouldn't be smart to name that decision now about the two different areas of the business, because a lot can change between now and then, and the most likely change is that this job changes. Charlie?
I've got nothing to add. We have a lot of good people that have risen in the Berkshire subsidiaries, and there's a reason why our operations have by and large done better than other big conglomerate companies. And one of them is that we change managers way less frequently than other people do. And that's helped us.
When Paul Andrews died, we know who he thought should take over there, but there wasn't any reason to announce that. I mean, Paul Andrews I wish he'd lived to be 100. We had one of our managers die not long ago, and how old was he at Garen?
Yeah, mid-90s, Seymour.
Yeah, Seymour Lichtenstein. And Seymour, I wrote him a letter when he was 80, and I said, I'm glad you're 80, and I'll write you again when you're 90. And I wrote him again when he was 90, and he didn't make it to 100. But he had a terrific fellow following him, and they really managed it jointly to some extent as the years went by. But it's case by case. And the main thing to do is have the right person running the whole place. Okay. Station 6.
Good morning. My name is Hachi Okamoto. I'm from Miyazaki, Japan. Mr. Buffett, I was one of the 8,000 employees at Salomon Brothers that you saved. I was younger back then. I was working at 7 World Trade Center. I've always wanted to thank you in person for saving the company, its employees, including myself and my family. So thank you, Mr. Buffett.
Thank you. And thank Derek Maughan, who actually had been over in Japan before that, and who I met for the first time the day before I put him in, and he turned out to, it wouldn't have worked if Derek hadn't come. So whatever you taught him in Japan, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now my question. Time to time, you have reminded us to not bet against America. What do you think are the most important things for U.S. to remain strong? And on the risk side, if the strength of the country is undermined, what could be the reasons?
Well, we've had a lot of tests. I mean, we're such a young country. When you think about Japan and you think about the United States, it's just incredible how new we are to the block. I mean, what are we? 234 years old since we started. That's nothing. I mean, Charlie and I combined are we've lived 2/3 of the life of the country. So, and I mean, it really has. I mean, we've been tested at 46 national elections, and we made some bad choices, and we've had a civil war. I mean, so the country has had enormous advantages, though, in some way, because we started with 0.5% of the world's population in 1790, and we now have something close to 25% of the world's GDP. And it wasn't because we had some incredible advantage in terms of the land. It was nice to have two oceans on each side back when people tried to rule the world by ruling the waves. But and we had good neighbors in Canada and Mexico, but it's a miracle. And you say, how do we keep the good parts of this system while calling out our obvious defects? And we do it in a very herky-jerky manner. But net, the United States is a better place to live than it was when I was born by a huge factor. I mean, I just got a root canal a week ago, and I was just thinking, I don't know who even invented Novocaine, but I'm for him. I mean, but in a million ways, I mean, you can romanticize about the past, but forget it. It has worked, but now we do have an atom bomb, and we wish nuclear power. We wish the atom had never been split, but it has been, and you can't put it back in the bottle. So the challenges are huge. Our government always looks. My dad was in Congress back in the 1940s, and it looked like a mess then. Although it was unified by the war to some degree, but it was still very partisan. Now the problem we have, I think, is that partisanship, it seems to me, has moved toward tribalism, and tribalism just doesn't work as well. I mean, when it gets to tribalism, you don't even hear the other side, and tribalism can lead to mobs. I mean, it flows. I mean, you've seen it elsewhere. We've seen it to a degree here. So we have to refine in a certain way our democracy as we go along. We deal with the world we live in. But if I still had a choice of any place to be born in the world, I'd want to be born in the United States, and I'd want to be born today. I mean, it is a better world than we've ever had, and with present-day communications, we can also see much more how terrible it is in many ways. And it's got problems. When I was born in 1930, there were 2 billion people in the world, and now there's maybe 7.7 billion and growing. And we went millennia with really no change in population. So and of course, we've introduced energy into, in an incredible way, into something where we now have 7.7 billion people using way more energy than they did when I was born, when there were 2 billion people. So it's an exciting world. It's a challenging world, and I don't know the solutions on things. I do think that we do need to think about different solutions in terms of how we get important problems solved, and that we don't kid ourselves that something magic will happen, or that everybody will get together and we'll all just cheer and it'll go away by 2050 or anything. And how well we adapt to that, we will see. I would say so far it doesn't look very promising, but then I'm sure that when Lincoln looked at it, what was going on in the Civil War didn't look very promising either. So I think that the U.S. is capable of doing remarkable things, and I think it wouldn't surprise me if they do it again. Charlie, are you? Pardon?
Well, I'm slightly less optimistic than Warren is. I think the best road ahead to human happiness is to expect less. I think it's going to get tougher, and I think the solution of having a huge proportion of the young and brilliant people all go into wealth management is a crazy development in terms of its natural consequences for American civilization. We don't need as many wealth managers as we have.
Charlie was born on January 1st, 1924, and you'd hate to go back to that, wouldn't you, Charlie?
Yes, I would, and I like more wealth managers who are just merely reflecting the fact there's more wealth. But I don't like everybody going into wealth management right out of MIT or something. I think the world's a little crazy now.
Take your choice. Okay, Becky.
This question comes from Dennis DeGennaro. As Warren stated in the 2022 annual report, Berkshire will always hold a boatload of cash in U.S. Treasury bills. It will also avoid behavior that could result in any uncomfortable cash needs at inconvenient times, including financial panics and unprecedented insurance losses. After Warren passes away, his A shares will be converted into B shares and distributed to various foundations. These foundations will then sell the shares to fund their causes. Warren estimates it will take 12 to 15 years for all his shares to be sold. I worry that a corporate raider like Carl Icahn or a group will buy up enough of these shares to take control of Berkshire and completely disregard Warren's philosophy of holding a lot of cash in U.S. Treasury bills and instead be greedy, reckless, and highly speculative and ruin Berkshire's position as a rock-solid financial fortress. I also worry that changes might be made in how Berkshire's subsidiaries are run. Do Warren and Charlie worry that these things could happen?
Well, I think it's fair to say we think about it plenty, but I don't worry enormously. If we, it is true that Greg and the directors will have a honeymoon period for a long time simply because of the votes that will still remain. I mean, but it's true that eventually they will get judged based on how well our operation fares versus others. Now, if we don't pay any dividends in 12 or 15 years, you're talking $1.5 trillion that it would take to take over. I think if we can't, that limits the group. They like to think about how much they can borrow against it. It doesn't work when you, and some of these, there's nobody to come close to doing it themselves. And I think that the important thing is that Berkshire be regarded as a national asset rather than a national liability. We've got to be a plus to the country with our form of operation, and we certainly have got a record which will then be 12 or 15 years longer, done with much more capital, more companies, more things will have happened where our hundreds of billions can work its way into the economy in terms of lots of jobs, lots of products, lots of behavior, and it can be compared with other things. So I think we win out if we deserve to win out, and I think the odds of that happening are very, very, very high. Charlie?
Well, I don't spend much time worrying about something that's going to happen 50 years ago and after I'm dead. I think if you sort of take care of each day's responsibilities pretty well and think ahead as well as you can, then you just take the results as they fall. So I'm philosophical about it. But I'm not. I think he's fretting unnecessarily.
Okay. Neither one of us are worried, basically. But we plan. We do plan. And you know, I've got a model in my mind of what Berkshire has been. That model is it's been modified plenty of times over 58 years. The one thing I knew initially or very quickly, was it shouldn't be a textile company. That was an important decision, and we've just played the hand as it come along, and we made a few really good decisions, and we'll never make a decision that kills us. The only things that are a threat to the planet, we don't have any answer for those. But we keep ourselves in better shape than anybody else. And we just aren't going to have big maturities of debt that come along. We aren't going to have insurance policies that can be cashed in en masse, and we will sit with what looks like a huge amount of capital, and it is a huge amount of capital, but there's a huge amount of earning power, there's a huge amount of diversity, everything. So our business model will be graded, and it'll be graded against a lot of people that we'd like to be graded against. So I think we're handing something very secure over to the future, and I think we've got the shareholder base like nobody has. I mean, there isn't anybody in the country that I know of, unless they've had an employee-owned company prior to going public or something of the sort. But this is the product of 58 years of regarding the shareholder as the owner of the company. But what does that mean? That means having happy customers. It means being welcomed by your community rather than having them turn you away. It means that the government feels better with you if there's a financial crisis, because you can provide something that actually the country can't under some circumstances, and you'll be there. And at the same time, it'll be good for the business. And we will have crises of one sort or another, but if they aren't challenging the planet, which worries you in terms of some of the threats that we have, we'll be a plus to the United States, and if we're a plus to the United States, we'll survive. Okay. Station 7.
Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, thank you for having us this weekend. My name is Bo Clayton, and I'm from Durham, North Carolina. One of the reasons that we are all here is that you're great storytellers, and we carry those stories back home with us. Can you please share a couple stories that maybe we haven't heard before about Mr. Abel and Mr. Jain that capture their character and their caliber as leaders?
Well, I'll start out with the Jeep. He walked into the office in 1986, and I'd gotten the bright idea of going into the reinsurance business, I think in maybe 1969. So I'd stumbled along for 17 years, and I had a wonderful guy that ran it, but he also liked certain brokers, and I mean, he was running it the traditional way, the top quality and everything else, but he fell into he didn't try and change the system. He tried to improve the system, and to some degree, and we went nowhere. 17 years wandering around in the wilderness, and I thought I knew we could have something good. And then Ajit came in on a Saturday, and Mike Goldberg had steered him in, I think, and Mike deserves to be enshrined in perpetuity for that act. And I talked with him a while. I think maybe I was opening the mail on Saturday while I talked with him, and he had absolutely zero experience with insurance, but he'd actually seen a good bit of how corporate America operated because he'd been in management consulting. And after talking with him, I knew I'd struck gold, and so I hired him and gave him the backing of some money, and we had a very good period in the market, almost right away for him to act. And Ajit, if I had the top pick of 10 insurance managers in the world, I could take all 10, and they wouldn't. You can't replace Ajit, and we still enjoy talking. We don't talk as frequently as we used to, but we used to talk about every day. But he's one of a kind, and if they're going to stick around long enough, you only need one of a kind. Paul Andrews stuck around at TTI, had all the money in the world. Every time I talked to him about getting a raise or something of the sort, he said, "We'll talk about that next year." He was not what you get when you get the top draft picks from the leading business schools. And I will say this, I have never looked at where anybody went to school in terms of hiring. I mean, I just, somebody mailed me a resume or something, I don't care where they went to school. And it just so happens that Ajit went to some pretty good schools, but he isn't Ajit because he went to the schools. And Charlie, you can tell a story or two. How'd you find Louis Vincenti?
Well, he was there.
But you got to recognize him.
I asked Louis once how he managed to play first-string football at, I think, Stanford, when he only weighed 165 pounds. And he said, "Well," he says, "I was pretty quick." And he was pretty quick. We have found a lot of people within our companies who were pretty quick.
Yeah, we had one guy that quit at fourth grade, didn't Ben Rosner? Am I wrong?
Oh yeah, totally self-educated. Ben Rosner knew more about retailing in difficult neighborhoods than anybody, and he watched everything in his business like a hawk. And he was amazing. Now there was an example. We never found anybody who could do what, when Ben died, that ability left us.
Yeah, and you want a story, it's kind of interesting because Ben Rosner had a partner, Leo Simon, and Leo Simon was Mo Annenberg's son-in-law, and Leo, therefore, was very, very, very wealthy, and Ben started with nothing, but they liked each other. And one time, well before they got involved in the business, the business we bought, but they got the idea of buying a submarine from World War I and taking it to the Century of Progress, which was the World's Fair, in effect, in Chicago, I think in 1933. So they bought the submarine for practically nothing. And they figured, the average guy from Omaha was going to his first World's Fair, get into a submarine for a quarter or something, that they'd pay it. So they hauled it from Florida, wherever they hauled it to Chicago, and then they got into Chicago, and they were hauling a submarine down the streets of Chicago, and it was creating traffic problems like nobody could imagine. So a cop came over, and he said to Ben, he says, "Where do you think you guys are going with a submarine?" And Ben says, "Well, I don't." He says, "You'll have to talk to my partner, Mr. Capone." The cop says, "You're on, just keep going." And that was Ben Rosner. And then Leo Simon died. And when he died in 1967 or so, Ben Rosner kept delivering half the profits to his widow, who was incredibly rich, of course, being Mo Annenberg's firstborn daughter. I think Mo had nine girls in a row before Walter came along. The 10th, I may be off by one, but anyway, I went to this fancy apartment, and anyway, Ben Ben kept her in for half the deal, and he had her sign the rent checks just so she would look like she was doing something in this business. And she didn't need the money, obviously, but he just felt he was obligated once his partner Leo died. And then she started criticizing him. And at that point, Ben went to his lawyer, or was her lawyer actually, Will Feldsteiner. I don't know whatever happened to Will, but he gave me a call because Ben wanted to call me because he wanted me to buy it. And he wanted me, if I bought it, he'd be rid of the ex-partner's wife, and he had me and Charlie come back, and we went to Will Feldsteiner's office, and Ben says, I'll work till the end of the year, and that's all. But I'll sell you this thing for $6 million, and it had $2 million of cash and a couple of million of real estate and a couple of million of operating earnings. It was just crazy. But he felt if he was getting a lousy price, she was taking a half of the lousy price for half the money. So he looked at me at some point. Charlie, you describe the rest of it. Look at it.
He said, I hear you're the fastest draw in the West. He says, draw.
We're in a New York lawyer's office.
Yeah.
And this guy he's selling his baby. And he told us he was leaving. I got Charlie on the side. I said, if this guy leaves at the end of the year, you can throw away every psychology book that's ever been written. I mean, it isn't going to happen. So we bought it, and we lived happily ever after with Ben. And one time, he was taking me over to see a property we had in Brooklyn. And along the way, I said, Ben, I promised you I wouldn't interfere in the business when we started. And he knew a but was coming. And he just said, thank you, Warren. And then shut me up. He was a lot of fun. We had so many Ben Rosner stories, but now you've heard one that hasn't been published before. Okay, Becky.